All right, good morning, everyone. I am Timothy Yee with Green Retirement, a registered principal offering security and advisory services through Independent Financial Group, LLC, IFG, a registered broker-dealer and investment advisor, member FINRA, SIPC, Green Retirement, Jeanne Thompson's consulting practice, and IFG are unaffiliated entities. We will not be discussing investments in this conversation, but past performance is no guarantee of future results. Whew. Good morning, Jean. How are you?
Good. Good morning. How are you guys?
We are all well. We are well. Really appreciate this. Been looking forward to this conversation for 2 months. But before we dive into what does retirement look like, just by way of background, again, retirement in my grandpa's era was retire at age 65, live for 3 years in retirement on Social Security, and you were dead by 68. For grandpa, he actually retired at 65. And 2 days later, retirement came to an end. That was it for Grandpa. Not because he died, but Grandma threw him out of the house. She did not like having him around and said that he was getting underfoot. And truthfully, as Grandpa told me some years later when I was 12, he was actually getting depressed, looking forward to retirement. He was not looking forward to it. He felt like he was being pushed out. And so he reopened his company, Flynn Farm Management, and back he went to managing farms in Nebraska. So Grandpa was happy doing that, and I think Grandma was happy as well. But Gene, before we dive into retirement, what does it look like? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us some background on who you are, how you came to this.
Sure. Yeah. So good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I'm on the East Coast. Like Timothy said, my name's Jeanne Thompson, and I spent 30 years in financial services before retiring from Fidelity Investments in December of 2021. So it's been 3.5 years that I retired. I actually was a young retiree. I retired at 54. I'm
Oh.
now 57. And I spent the majority of my career at Fidelity and most of it in their workplace investing business. So, working with the largest employers on designing their 401(k) plans. During my time there, I led product teams, research teams, and I left, as I said, in December 2021 as a senior vice president of their consulting group, working with, again, large employers, designing their benefits. And it did really expand over time beyond retirement into financial wellness. Because many, as you know, millennials and Gen Z came into the workforce, many people struggled with saving for retirement because of competing financial priorities. So they offered actually, Fidelity offered a voluntary buyout to about 6,000 employees. If your age and your tenure equaled 70, which mine did at the time,
Mhm.
you're eligible. So I decided I had always wanted to retire early, knowing I loved corporate America, but I kind of wanted to explore what else was out there and kind of get back in touch with more of my free spirit roots. And so retired then, and it's been 3.5 years, and it was quite a journey, so which we'll talk about.
Oh, and that's interesting. And you must have done well. You have 35,000 followers now on TikTok. And
Yes.
I must say, I have not signed up for TikTok, but that's pretty cool. You've got retirees and pre-retirees following you,
Yes.
huh?
Yes, 86% of my following is over the age of 45, and of that, 60% is over 55. So there's actually a lot of older people on TikTok, which nobody really thinks about. But yeah,
Yeah.
I grew that organically.
As I always say, folks, in TikTok, particularly in my world with disclosures and all the other stuff, if a TikTok is 1 to 2 minutes, about 30 seconds of it is me reading a disclosure. What can I really say in 30 seconds to a minute and a half? Not a lot. So I stay off TikTok. But I can see how you came to this business sort of from your background at Fidelity. But what drew
Hmm.
you into, I'm retired, now I want to do a retirement consulting practice?
Well, so actually, that was not my plan.
Oh.
So, no, not at all. I kind of came to it by happenstance. So when I retired after spending, the last 25 years in the 401(k) business, I retired and thought, I know everything about retirement. This is going to be great. But the irony is, I really struggled for the first year to kind of find my footing. I had plans. I was going to work on a book, which was not about retirement. more about work-life balance. But I really struggled. I didn't realize how much I had tied my identity to my job, how much I relied on the structure that my job provided. I didn't realize how much of my network and community was tied to my job. And so when I first retired, I was really lost. And that first year was, I would say, a real journey of self-discovery and realizing that I am not my job. I let my job define me far too much. And so I came up with 5 things. And through my TikTok, I started sharing my journey, and people came out of the woodwork,
Hmm.
validating not only how I was feeling, but sharing how they were feeling. And so the more they shared, the more I would dig into different topics that people struggled with. And then I would research them, create content on them. And that's where I was like, there's a gap. Financial services and advisors and employers help people prepare financially for retirement, but there's no like onboarding to retirement. And so
Mm.
that's where I felt there's a gap in, the industry or the market. And so I started to focus on that primarily.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the 5 pillars and what, in your view, and from what you've learned from 35,000 people, what is a successful retirement and does it vary by age?
Yeah, so a successful retirement, you think before you get there, it's all about just traveling and just sitting around and playing golf or pickleball or whatever sport it is that you want. But there's actually a lot more to it than that. I think a successful retirement is one where you feel like you have a sense of structure, where you feel like you have a purpose and a mission, and you can actually thrive. I think the people that really struggle in retirement, are the ones that did really identify with their job and they don't know what their purpose is. Because to some extent, when you retire, it's also a perfect storm of other life events. You may
Hmm.
be suddenly become an empty nester. And that's very common. And a lot of people think, oh, empty nest when my kids go to college. It's not actually having 2 kids of my own that are now 25 and 26. It's not actually until they leave the house and they're financially independent that you really feel that they're on their own. And so people also, there's a lot of gray divorce happening now. I've got a lot of people that going through empty nest, divorce, and then taking care of aging parents who maybe by the time you retire have also passed. So you may no longer may have your career, you may not have those aging parents to take care of, you no longer have kids to take care of, and suddenly your whole purpose in life without those things is gone. And so it's this journey of finding that. And if you can find it in another avenue, and maybe it's paid work, maybe it's not, those are the
Hmm.
people that I think really have a successful retirement.
So, talk a little bit more then about the pillars.
Yeah, so there's 5 pillars. I call it retire and shift. And of course, having come from corporate, shift is an acronym. And
Okay,
yeah,
retire and shift. Okay, I
shift.
got you. All
That's
right.
right. So you shift. And shift. So it starts with S is for structure, and it's creating that daily structure. When I first retired, I thought I don't want structure. I just want to wake up every day and think, what am I going to do today? Similar to how you do on vacation. But in
Okay.
reality, day after day after day of waking up with nothing and no agenda becomes really unfulfilling. And so part of it is creating, daily structure, whether it's morning blocks or afternoon blocks, and then weekly anchors, monthly anchors, and that type of thing. So starting with structure, and I start with structure because it's the most tangible and it's the easiest. To say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to get up at 7, I'm going to work out, then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. The next is hobbies. I was someone who had no hobbies. I had a lot of activities, I like to ski, I like to run, but they weren't actual pursuits where I was trying to improve. And so hobbies, because of my raising my kids, my aging parents, working full time, being the primary and sole breadwinner for my family for many years, and my commute, I didn't have any hobbies. And to be honest with you, I thought hobbies were frivolous and quite frankly a waste of time. I now realize that was an error in my ways, and I never should have done that. And so hobbies, it's really important because hobbies also help you create identity, which is the I in shift. And you can become a pickleballer. And Timothy, you shared at one point how you might start a dog walking business.
Yeah.
Yeah, hobbies are a great way to start shaping a new and different identity. And identity is that next one. Many people tie their identities to their careers or to being a mother, or to being a father, or to being a child, or an advisor, a teacher, a nurse, a doctor. And without that, you kind of are wondering, who are you? If you go to a cocktail party and people say, what do you do? That's always the first question. And without your job, it's really hard to answer that question. And so hobbies help you shape that identity. Friends and community is the F in shift, and that is really many people tie their communities and networks to work. And when that disappears, I talked a lot on my TikTok about how people lose their work friends, especially if your friends continue to work. You're often that's the bond that tied you, and without work, you no longer have that bond and they fade away. And that's something many people don't expect. They think they're actually real friends when really they're just work friends. And then finally, the last one is the T is for thriving, and that's finding your
Hmm.
mission and purpose.
I must say that I can certainly appreciate the structure, and I actually need it myself. I like getting up at about 5:30. Out I go for my walk, uh, and then it's into the gym, and away we go. And the day starts, and I'm already thinking about what does the day hold for me. The hobbies, yeah, it. I don't see them as frivolous, but I don't necessarily have a lot of time. And I think of hobbies, as you said, golf, skiing, something really meaningful. I mean, my hobby is an online scavenger. Well, it's an online and in-person scavenger hunt that requires no skill. Anybody can do it. You
Right.
know, I'm not sure if that even qualifies as a hobby or is more just a fun activity for getting exercise. The identity one is one I want to drill in on though, because early on I was at a bank and I was going to be CEO of the bank and I had the lapel pin and my darling wife at the time said, "You don't need to have that lapel pin. Be strong in yourself." And so far, she's the only person I've seen who can say that and isn't tied to her job, has her own separate identity, and perfectly happy. Do you find a lot of retirees have identity issues that they are their job, or are more like my wife who just say, "I don't care about the company, I don't care about the job, I'm my own independent person"? What do you find on the I?
Yeah, the I is an interesting one. I find it's a mix. People either tie their identities to their job or they don't. The more your job is a profession, like and it's not even, an income thing. It's really more if it's a profession like a nurse or a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or a corporate executive or an advisor, I
Mhm.
find the jobs that really um, are somewhat a profession, and they people feel like it's their purpose, and they say my job isn't what I do, it's who I am. Those are the people that really tend to struggle. And it
Mhm.
could be even I'm an electrician, I'm a plumber. Those
Mhm. Mhm.
people tend to struggle more. I also think to some extent, women have often a lot of them, if they have children, they are also raising their kids, so they have that identity as a mother. And what happens though is when they go to the empty nest, so they lose that day-to-day identity of mothering, and then they lose the career, it happens. But for men, I find that it's not gender specific, I guess is what I should say. It happens to both men and women equally. And the people that invest a lot of their heart and soul into their jobs are the ones that it tends to happen more to. The people that are like, look, I go 9 to 5. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do overtime. I'm not going to do this. I have an entirely full life outside of my job. That happens less to.
Yeah.
Um, and even the people that I've had a lot of people that are burnt out, like whether they're nursing, whether they're teaching, doctors who are burnt out. Those people think they're not going to struggle because they're so burnt out, but yet they still do because their whole life was their career.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you have a casual relationship with something, it's just another job, what have you. But I would tend to think that with a lot of entrepreneurs, given how hard the entrepreneur life is, entrepreneurs, the self-employed, would find that a little bit more. I'm curious on the F side, the friends, as you said, building community. I think at last count, I have 3,000 Facebook friends and 3,000 LinkedIn. And do I know them? No, there are very few that I can actually say, I know this person in depth, what Simon Sinek calls the 8 minute friend. Is that more, and are your 35,000 people primarily in America or are they scattered around the world? Do you get a global perspective? How does friendship play into this?
Yeah, so I do get a global perspective. There's most of the content that I create gets pushed out to obviously the English speaking countries. So I have part of my following is from Canada, the UK, and Australia. Interestingly enough, I have a lot of Australians. And so these things that I've identified are not just American, I would say. They're global in a sense of from what I gather from the English speaking countries. So I'll say that. And what's interesting is I know like in the UK and even parts of Europe, even Australia, they have the superannuation, they have pension plans over
Yeah.
there. So it's very, even though they have a different financial retirement system, these non-financial factors still play a role. So that's the second part of your question. The first part of your question was, can you
Well,
repeat
really
it?
on friends, I guess
Oh,
what I'm
friends, right.
thinking, Jeannie, is in Asia, you have, again, I'm half Chinese, the other part's big chunk Irish. I worked in Citibank Hong Kong, been through Asia extensively, even Citibank Singapore. Uh, in Asia, what I found, and this is a generalization, but I found that you have fewer friends, but the friends you have are deeper. Whereas here, I have 3,000 Facebook, 3,000 on LinkedIn. No, I'm not denigrating any of my Facebook or LinkedIn contacts who are listening. But at the same time, do I really know them? Simon Sinek says it as a true friend is somebody you can call and have a deep 8 minute conversation. And there is science behind the 8 minutes, which that's a topic for a different day. Do you find that there's variation in friendship, in quality of community in these English speaking countries? Or is it pretty much all the English speaking countries, just like the US, we have what some might say are surface level friendships?
Yeah, no, I do think, I mean, I can't, I, I have a few friends in the UK. I don't really have any Australian friends, but I do think even regionally within the US, I think
Hmm.
there's different degrees of friendship. I grew up in the Northeast, born and raised in the Northeast, everywhere from New York to Boston.
Uh,
But I did spend, when I first retired, 4 years down in Florida in one of those big, development, the retirement communities.
oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, down in on the southwest coast in Naples, Florida. A
Hmm.
lot of retirees. You get a lot of people from the Midwest. There's a lot of New York, New Jersey. And what I found very interesting down there is that and this again is a generalization, but many of the people from the Midwest, it was much more like sort of superficial friendship, acquaintance. Everyone's really pleasant, very, very nice. But I know you never got to that deeper level uh,
Hmm.
where I find in the Northeast, and maybe I gravitated more towards those people.
Hmm.
Uh, and maybe it's just because that's what I'm familiar with or the style of friendship, but it would go deeper. But I do find that in retirement, what happens is you spend all this time working, you've developed all these professional networks. And oftentimes, if you do have you know, social friends, a lot of them were tied to the kids, especially as a woman for me. A lot of the friends I had were tied to the kids. The kids are gone, work's gone. And I had, my sisters and some old college friends, but I didn't have that day-to-day network. And so that's
Hmm.
something that I had to rebuild. And then even as couples, you have friends that get divorced and things like that. My husband and I then had to kind of redevelop couples friends. And I personally found when I was down in Florida rebuilding that network that we did gravitate more towards people that were from our region of the country, which I found looking back very interesting.
Well, we'll shift topics a little bit to what a successful retirement is, and maybe you can speak a little bit about reinventing yourself.
Yeah. So going back to the successful retirement, I think it really comes back to finding that mission and purpose. You really need a reason to get up out of bed every day, and work
Hmm.
provides that. Children provide that. Without that, you, you kind of feel lost and very unfulfilled. And I think as human beings, we want to add value, we want to feel needed. And when you're at the height of your career and you feel like you're going a million miles and everybody's sort of clawing at you for something and you don't have enough hours in the day, you dream of the day where you have all this freedom and time. But if you have that, but yet you have no reason to pursue this path versus that path, and no one feels, you feel like you're not giving value or providing fulfillment to anyone, it gets very lonely and kind of boring. And you also feel like you have nothing to bring to the table. You have nothing to talk about. So to me, finding that mission and purpose is really part of the journey. And I think to
Mm.
some extent, you could just go back to work. And I have found that many people do just go back to work, like your grandfather, because that, quite frankly, is the most familiar and the easiest path. I do find that there's some that want to explore what else? What was it? And I think the place to start is what was it? What did I want to do when I was a kid? What did I really enjoy? Like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a newscaster. And so
Oh,
for me,
well, TikTok, sort of like a
exactly.
newscaster.
Exactly. And doing public speaking and,
Yeah.
and I did do a lot of public speaking in my career. So it's just a natural, I mean, it was the favorite part of my career.
Mm.
And so I think it's kind of getting the path to finding that and finding that successful retirement is really sort of doing some inner work to figure out, what are those things I wanted to do when I was a kid before, someone told me to get a job with benefits, and to really start figuring out what are the ways I can channel and start to explore those things in small ways now. And can that just be a hobby? Will it lead to a second career or second profession? But doing it on your terms versus doing it for someone else.
Well, I guess sort of then tying into that, then are people truly retiring? And I'm beginning to get the impression that, and again, you have 35,000 stories. I'm beginning to get the impression the answer is no. People are reinventing, they're doing something. Or do you have the stereotypical person who said, I'm done and is happily sitting at wherever?
Yeah,
Are
I
people
would say
truly
no.
retiring? No,
No,
okay.
not in the sense of if retirement means I'm sitting on the couch watching daytime TV.
Oh,
And I guess in today's world, it wouldn't be data, it would be like scrolling TikTok all day or some other social media platform. But I would say, in my experience, no. Now there's some people that, may decide I don't want to work, but I'm gonna, the whole pickleball thing. I'm gonna dive into pickleball. I had friends down in Florida where it's like the capital there of pickleball that were playing 7 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day, and on three different
wow.
leagues. Yes. So they're not just sitting on the couch. They are literally physically active 3 hours a
Hmm.
day, playing in multiple leagues, co-ed leagues, women's leagues, men's leagues, the whole thing. And so I do think, to me, I've kind of reframed retirement. Everyone's like, we need a new word because nobody sits on the couch anymore. But to me, retirement should be a renaissance. Really this era, just like in Europe with the Renaissance era,
Hmm.
where they explored art, literature, architecture. To me, it really retirement should be initially this exploration of other parts of ourselves that got tamped down or ignored while we were,
Yeah.
building our careers and our families and things like that. And so to
Hmm.
me, it's almost, I feel like to some extent like a teenager again, because the world feels like your oyster. And you have, I'm not 80 yet. I retired on the early side, and you have a good 10, 15, 20 years to really kind of push the envelope and see what else can you bring to the world besides what you did in your career. And so to me, this concept of renaissance is really where I think we should go with retirement.
That sounds good. I know Rose is going to be asking a question, and we're also going to dive in since before we started the conversation, we were talking a little bit about accumulation and decumulation.
Yeah.
Obviously, money plays a factor in whether you get to retire or not and what the quality of retirement is. But first, Rose, go ahead.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure if you were going to touch it, so I thought maybe I could draw us back to the pre-retirement period.
Oh, yeah.
That like some of our or probably a lot of our participants, Jean, might not be in the fortunate situation that you had, where you know that there was that confluence of having worked there for that amount of time and being offered like the generous retirement package that you had, which was, I would have supposed like really difficult to refuse. So it came at the right moment for you. But for our participants who might not be in that situation where they're kind of wanting to know when is the right time, when do I feel like I have enough in terms of savings, and not to put you on the spot for having to put figures in, but just as a general guideline, in order to maybe enjoy retirement, what might you say should our participants be on the lookout for? And then corollary to that, as they look into the future, as they you know, consider these guidelines for when it might be best to retire. And I'm certainly very interested in your answer myself. Um, how, like, what is the time period prior to retirement when they should prepare themselves for it? Because as I listen to you and I acknowledged like the realities of, you know, stopping work from like being in the corporate world, which I was before green retirement, and then being retired with no schedule and having your identity tied to work and so on and so forth. um, I feel that it's really important to prepare for it and not just to say that, oh, retirement is going to be August 25th and I'll be free. But I would suppose that uh, an important component is like probably a period before August 25th. I'm getting myself ready. And like this shift that you're the framework that you have should be considered like a period before August 25th and not on August 25th. So two questions that are related.
Yeah. So those are great questions. So the first, I'll start with the how much. How much you need. That's like the $1 million question that everybody wants to know the answer to. There's all sorts. I know at Fidelity when I was there, we had a 10x rule of thumb that you need 10 times your ending income to retirement. And there was age-based guidelines, so you could kind of keep track of are you on track? I will say, having actually retired and having to live off my savings, I think the more important question is not how much, it's actually what do you plan to spend every year?
Mhm.
Because say you had $1 million, but you want to spend 250,000 every year, that money is not going to last that long. And so I think the key question for people to really dig into, and I've talked a lot about this with people, is how much what's your annual budget? Do you have any idea? Everybody hates budgeting. It's the most like miserable thing to do. And and part of that preparation question is you should start tracking your spending. And now, granted, your spending will probably change in retirement. You may not have dry cleaning or commuting costs or other things that you would do when you're working, if you go out to lunch every day or whatever, but you should really start to track what your spending is. Because if you can say, okay, I can live on $50,000 a year or maybe $100,000 a year, that will really dictate how much you need. And so to me, not
That
having,
makes sense.
having this nebulous, like, oh, I don't really know how much I spend, or just saying, my salary is 75,000 a year, so that must be what I spend. Like that's not a good plan either because you're probably saving some of that. You're getting employer sponsored healthcare. Like so you really as much as I hate doing it, you really got a budget. And I will say, since I've retired, we always kind of had a loose budget, but since I've retired, it's a much more well thought out budget. My husband and I go over it every month and we kind of track like, okay, where are we spending? What's the market doing? What's our, income streams? And so I think that is really, I do think the conversation needs to fit, like shift literally from how much to how much do you need to how much do you want to spend. And you may not know exactly how much you want to spend, but you really need to know what's my essential expenses and then what's my discretionary that can
Mhm.
fluctuate depending on the market. So that's that. Hopefully that answers your first question.
I would
Um,
also say, folks, chiming in on that, you also need to know where you want to retire.
yes.
So if you tell me that your dream is to have a home in Detroit, I have seen it on Zillow. There are homes in Detroit for $30,000 to $40,000. I'm sure they're fixer-uppers. And as Rose will tell you, you do not want to see me with a hammer or a screwdriver. It's not going to end well. I Things will fall apart even worse than they are. So then you have to factor that in. But if you tell me that your desire is to live on Nob Hill in San Francisco, well, oh boy, that's a whole different ball game. And then life expectancy comes in, long-term care costs come in. Are you going to be taking care of it? Jeannie, you mentioned something about parents, and the sandwich generation discussion can come in. So there are any number of factors, and if you're working with a financial advisor, they will have programs that prompt you with these questions saying, have you thought of this and this? Another one to consider is if you have a partner or if you're married, is there a significant age difference? Is one going to continue working while the other wants to retire? I remember talking with an airline pilot, desire for retirement, stay at home, read a book. Wife's idea of retirement, travel. Husband's response, I spent my entire career traveling, flying a plane. Why do I want to do that? Please leave me alone to my book. Interesting dynamic. So I guess that leads to Rose's second question. Jeannie, when would you say people should start having these conversations?
Yeah, so I retirement should definitely not be a sudden thing. Having the date is great, but not thinking about it up until then,
Mhm.
I don't recommend. I mean, obviously you have to start, I would, from a financial perspective, it would be, at least a year to 2 years, at 3 years out, I would start tracking your spending. Where is it going? And start like identifying how will this spending stay consistent in retirement or how will this spending change? I would say one of the things we didn't touch on in the last question is healthcare expense. So if you retire before
Mm.
65, healthcare, like I'm paying out of pocket for healthcare. Healthcare is very expensive. You can get like a catastrophic plan, but that's a little bit risky as you're getting older. You probably want more coverage than just the catastrophic plan. And so you really do have to factor in that healthcare cost to your monthly expense, which you don't when you're working for an employer that
Hmm.
provides employer-sponsored healthcare. So given that, I would definitely start thinking about the financial perspective. And the biggest thing you can do towards that, is taking advantage of catch up, both in like if you have an HSA or 401k, but really start tracking your spending and all of
Hmm.
your expenses, figuring out what's essential, what's discretionary, and then how that change in retirement to start giving you a sense of how much you really need. Because that's going to be the biggest. And Timothy, you had said, depending on when you retire, the younger you retire, the more you need. The later you retire because of longevity, you know, in theory, the less you'd need. But then I would also start thinking about how do you want to structure your days? How do you want to spend your time? What hobbies do maybe it might be a good idea to start testing out some hobbies on the weekends before you take the leap to kind of figure out, well, do I like pickleball? Do I like golf? Do I like these things? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But it's worth kind of testing the waters on some of those things versus now you're done and you have like an endless amount of time in front of you. And the other is starting to build networks outside of work, friends and community. A lot of that can come through the hobbies. I have
Mm.
pickleball friends and I have TikTok friends and writer friends and all kinds of different friends that I've developed through my hobbies. So that's another. And as you start to test those things, it'll start to emerge. A lot of people say, "Oh, I want to travel." So they plan the big trip, but then what? So then you get home from the
Mm.
trip. Unless you sell everything and hop on a cruise ship or hop in a van and you're gonna just travel through your retirement, eventually that trip ends. And so even if you are planning that trip, you should start to think about, okay, when I get back, then what?
It's funny, we do have a client who is RVing, airstreaming her way around. The airstream is hooked up to her truck, and we see where she's going, and it's quite interesting. And yeah, we had another client who is quite good at golf, very, very good, and lives on a golf course and is realizing, okay, well, that's getting old. I mean, how many times can you play the same course? You can move the hole, and that's about the only thing exciting there.
Yeah.
I think back though to Grandpa, and as Grandpa was preparing for retirement, and indeed he was thinking about it ahead of time. I don't know how much of a discussion he had with Grandma, and obviously I was a wee kid, so I didn't know the questions to ask, but I got the sense that he was afraid of something, and he couldn't quite, he either didn't want to tell me or he didn't put his finger on it. But looking at your 3.5 years of consulting, the 35,000 followers, what are people afraid of in retirement?
A lot of it is feeling old, and
Ooh,
feeling ill. Yeah, I'll have to say it. I
okay.
think, when you say
Can you say it again, Jean? What was that?
feeling old,
Oh,
and irrelevant, not feeling like they bring anything to the table, feeling like they're sort of ignored by society. Once you say, if you're at a party and someone says, "What do you do?" and you say you're retired, sometimes that just kills the conversation. Or people say, "Well, it must be nice, lucky for you." So there's a lot of different reactions, but I do think a lot of people feel like once they retire, they're literally going to get old and die the next day. I think that's changing, but the connotation that retirement has is this antiquated view of just sitting in the rocking chair, whittling your days away until death comes knocking on the door. And I think today retirement is evolving because people are retiring in some cases younger, and retirement is lasting decades, not 2 to 3 years, as it was in the case of your grandfather. And so I do think people fear, and they obviously the big one, they fear running out of money. I mean, that's the biggest thing because back in the day, people had pension plans. Today, very few people have pension plans. And so this idea of, you spend your whole life saving money and now you have to spend it or decumulate to spend it down is very scary. A lot of people don't want to spend their money, and so they are very conservative in retirement.
Hmm.
But I do think that this notion of feeling old, feeling irrelevant, and feeling like you don't bring value, it underpins some of the financial fears as well.
And the money part, again, folks, I would be remiss to say if we didn't talk about living wages and bring that up, and wealth inequality, and the fact that some people cannot retire. And I certainly understand that. If I were to look at some of the jobs that I've had in the past, yeah, there's no way I could have retired. Even with the pay raises, what have you, it maybe if I move to other cities, but not everyone has that luxury of just saying, I'm going to pack it up and off we go. So the financial aspect is definitely there. Again, working with a financial planner, saving as much as you can. Any of you who have attended my group participant talks, I stress over and over the financial calculators that are free out there trying to predict how much might you have in retirement. But to your point, Jeannie, there are a whole lot of other factors that go in just beyond money. In case anyone is curious about retirement, I'll just pop into the chat box. The 87-year-old Chinese grandpa who looks absolutely fantastic as he struts the runway. Not that I'm thinking at 87 I'll look like that, and I know James is going to say something inappropriate about my muscle tone, but I really do admire that fellow. He started in his 70s appearing in runway shows, and now at age 87, he's going down the runway and rocking it. So that is one definition of retirement. Fashion runway model. I think that might be an interesting career for me. I can see Rose shaking her head again. Um, so we've talked a little bit about what people are afraid of. Maybe we can just sort of hit two questions. Surprises in retirement, things that people don't consider, and maybe you can just say a little bit more about that T in shift. How do people get back to relevancy, find an identity, come up with a mission? Sometimes when I hear mission, I think about some of those sessions in banking. We're going to come up with a mission statement that everybody's going to agree to. Well, no wonder it falls flat on its face.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and I
how
think,
do
yeah,
people
that's
find
right.
that individual mission, and what surprises people in retirement?
Yeah. So what surprises people in retirement? I think what I have found, well, two things, and from my own personal experience and from just hearing the stories that I get, I think that what surprises people, those that had tied their identities to their job, I don't think they realize it until they get there. And all of a sudden the phone stops ringing and people say, "What do you do?" And they don't have a good answer. I think some of the things in that shift, whether it's not having hobbies, it's the identity, it's the reliance on the structure that the job
Hmm.
provides. I think those are the most surprising things. I also think the other thing um, is that people can actually, it surprises them how they can actually make it work with the money that they have set aside, plus Social Security or any annuities or whatever products they've set up, that
Hmm.
income stream actually can work. And then often, you think your money's just going to decline, 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 and go to zero. But because of the market and because of the way, you work with your advisor to structure, it doesn't go down as fast as you think. And so I think that's surprising that many people don't, cognitively, they know how money works and how the market works and how the interest rates
Uh-huh.
all works. But when they actually see, like, oh, it's not actually direct. If I take out, $50,000 to support this year, my account balance doesn't just drop into, it drops, but it sort of comes back through the through the interest rates and all of that. So I think
Hmm.
that's what's interesting. On the second part of the question, how do you get to it? I think it's an evolution. I think it's a test and learn. Just like
Hmm.
you have to sort of just like you would in a business, you kind of treat your retirement like you would any strategic project at work. It's you try a few things, see if they
Interesting.
work,
Hmm.
right? And if they don't, see how you like it, see how it resonates. If it doesn't, then you try something else. I think it's that in that sort of entrepreneurial way, if you look at it as your own little, project or business, you sort of have to test and learn and you run pilots. And if they work, great. And if they don't, then you move on to something else. So I really do think it's really doing some thinking about what is it you enjoy, what brings you joy, what brings value to the world. You try it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, you scrap it, you cut your losses, as they say in the finance world. You cut your losses and you
Yeah.
move on.
And be willing to embrace different identities as time moves on. Again, I think about my retiree living on the golf course, and for many years that was fulfilling. And now he's moving on to other things. It's not quite so much as an exciting thing anymore. We've got about two more questions, but Rose, you got one. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. If in terms of like finding like different things to do, and I like what you said, Jean, about like this is kind of the time where you can test things, but taking into account like some of our participants who might not be so financially secure in retirement, have you seen like any feedback from your followers for those who might be apprehensive about not having enough, like actually trying like different careers? Because I was
Mm,
it was interesting to me that with advancement in AI, like a lot of jobs are being projected to be to disappear, right? And however, there are jobs that AI can't replace, which is like jobs that you do with your hands. And you had mentioned earlier, like plumbers and things like those are like blue collar jobs actually are the ones that are not going to be replaced by AI unless unless it's robots, which would be so much more in the future that would be doing those. So are you seeing any feedback from your, social media about that, about people trying, or even I think like fixing cars, like that could be a hobby that could also bring you like more like financial returns as well. So I'm curious about that, if that's something that might be happening or something that people have already considered.
Yes, I would say so. I would say, well, two things. One, on the some of the folks that haven't prepared enough financially, a lot of them will wait until 65 to get Medicare and Social Security. The lower your income, the more Social Security will replace. So Social Security replaces a
Hmm.
higher percent of income for lower income workers. So
Hmm.
there is that. But I would also say that yes, I've seen people, and people have shared with me that many have gone into teaching, like substitute, even just substitute teaching. If they don't want the full commitment of being a classroom teacher, they'll go back. They're always looking for substitute teachers. Many have gone back into substitute teaching. I know someone that's working on their nursing degree to get as a second career, to become a nurse. And so I do think that that whole second career is, and people that have been very handy becoming part-time carpenters. The thing with, I think, plumbing and electricians is you need the license. And so the licensing to become an electrician or a plumber can take a few years. But that's something that someone could do on the side to get enough hours in the school and the training while they're still working so that they can have that as a second career. I know when my children were young, we had a retired carpenter who just continued doing it on his own, finish our basement. So I do think that you'll start to see a lot of that going forward.
Well, final two questions for you, Jeanne. I'm just curious, first on the generational view. You mentioned Gen X and boomers. I'm curious now, I believe we're out to Generation Alpha. Gen Alpha
Yes.
is the new group. What are
Yes.
you seeing, or given that your followers are, 65 and older or 55 and older, are you seeing generational differences in how retirement is viewed?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of younger workers, the millennials, and I imagine my kids are Gen Z. They're not even thinking about retirement because they're only in their 20s. But,
Hmm.
I think as you get into your 30s and 40s, a lot of people think that they'll never retire because financially they're not going to be able to. But then you have this movement, which is the financially independent retire early. There's a whole
The
another,
fire
yeah,
generation.
yeah, the fire generation. But I do
Hmm.
think the one thing, when people get into this mindset, oh, I'll never be able to retire, I will say that can be a little bit, I always worry about that because a lot of people, even today, are sort of quote forced into retirement through a health event, through a layoff, and then they try to find another job and they can't find another job. So I do think that even though they think they may never retire, a lot of people do get forced into retirement. But having those side hustles, I think is really important. From the other thing I would say with younger generations, a lot of them are talking about taking sabbaticals throughout life and mini retirements
Hmm.
between jobs, and having much more, not this like, corporate, let me climb the ladder in this upward trajectory, but saying life is more important to me. I'm not going to throw my heart and soul into work. Work is just a component of my life, and I'm going to enjoy my life throughout versus saving everything for the end. And so I do think retirement is really going to shift over time because I don't think that anyone really just wants to sit on the couch anymore, especially here in the US, we have the hustle culture and everyone's
Hmm.
so used to being productive that it just feels wrong just to sit in a rocking chair. And quite frankly, many of the white collar jobs, your body hasn't taken the same toll that it has if you had, if you were a farmer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do agree with you there. It can be generational. It can also be the kind of work, and it can also be the person's personality. I'm
Yes.
just my little ADHD self. I can see myself getting quite fidgety pretty quickly, and
Yeah, me too.
yeah, maybe what I need to do is grab my kayak and inflate it, and off I go. And at least with a good workout, maybe I'll feel better. So, final question for you, just really taking a look at what your practice is and what is it you do. I mean, you 3.5 years in, clearly there's a demand. 35,000 people are following you, but I'm not seeing how to monetize 35,000 followers with you on TikTok. Is it paid speaking presentations? What is your business model? How did you come to this? I know you were going to write a book. That didn't happen from what I understand.
Yeah,
Is that right?
my first book didn't, but my second is.
Okay,
Yeah,
you're on a second book. Okay,
yeah, I'm
the
working on
second
a
book.
second book. Yeah, I'm working on a second book now about retirement specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually, I came to this whole thing just through my own experience, but having been a consultant before, so I do a lot of public speaking for employers that have a group of pre-retirees that are not, that they're on the cusp of wanting to retire, but they're
Hmm.
not ready to take the leap. And so employers have a lot of financial advisors, and typically their 401(k) provider comes in and does a lot of workshops around the financial preparation to retirement. So have come in and created my business around doing workshops for pre-retirees on the non-financial aspects of retirement. And so I do them online. Sometimes I'll go in person
Hmm.
and do like a 1 day or half day or even a 1 hour workshop. Really depends on what the employer is looking for. And it's really everything from corporate companies to universities, a lot of professors, to
Yeah,
medical, like nurses. And so that's kind of my sweet spot right now.
fantastic. Well, folks, any questions from you? Any questions from the audience?
Just soaking it all in. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, David. Thank you for attending.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, Javier, not to put you on the spot, but any questions? Rose, anything from you as well?
No, this is
Rose is only 32, by the by, so she has a
still
long
have
ways to go.
still have a long runway, but I think it's really important. What I'm learning here is that uh, it's I think really good to have those figures, like identifying what the essential expenses
Hmm.
are. That way you are prepared. But then, yes, there's that financial preparation, but there's also that it seems to me like emotional, psychological, mental,
Mhm.
social preparation that goes into retirement. That it's not just having a set date and working financially for it, but there's like all the other aspects of what would make retirement exciting and fulfilling need to be considered as well. So thank you so much, Jean. This was wonderful.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Any last parting comments? If not, we will be doing our next one will be on July 11th. This will be on cybersecurity. I know the first Friday is July 4th. I suspect my attendance will be minimal at the July 4th conversation. And Jean, if you could, in the chat box, please do put in your LinkedIn, your email, how
Oh,
people can
sure.
get in touch with you.
Sure.
But again, July 11th, cybersecurity, not only just from a 401(k) point of view, but also a personal point of view. I met one of the B corporations that happens to specialize in cybersecurity and scared the bejabbers out of me. I thought I was doing okay with my malware VPN combo, but apparently more is needed. All right. Well, you've got the information for LinkedIn, email, and Jeannie, thank you for your time, folks. We will see everybody next month and be well. Bye for now.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Jean.
Gene.
Thank you.
Bye now.